Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. I have a 1979 Gibson Les Paul Standard to share with you guys today. Now, there's not anything inherently super special about a 70s Les Paul Standard, and to be honest, they're not necessarily my favorite. I prefer the customs from this era, but they are pretty historically significant. Let's learn some more. Being from 1979, I grouped this one into the mid to late 70s Les Pauls, because they all have very similar characteristics to them. They started having these after the move to Nashville around 1975 from the original Kalamazoo plant. There's a lot of people that will look down upon these guitars because they were built by new workers, not the original crew. There was a lot of training going on, there was mishaps. The whole Norlin era was basically ran by number crunchers instead of people who loved guitars. So there was cost-saving techniques done on these instruments, such as 5 and 7 piece tops, crazily enough, but they're kind of quirky in their own rights. So in order to know if you have a Kalamazoo or Nashville made guitar, you're going to want to check out your serial number. If the last 3 digits are 499 or less, you have the more desirable Kalamazoo factory. Now, just because you have a Nashville-style guitar doesn't mean it's bad, it's not the original factory. But there will be minute construction differences. For example, the Kalamazoo ones, typically I find they have slightly beefier necks, not huge. Another thing is the side markers are a little bit different. They're larger on a Kalamazoo made guitar. But during that transition of factories was also the switch to the 3-piece maple neck. This was a new thing on the Les Paul, and it lasted until around 1982. It started to phase out in that era. This was also when they introduced something called the Nashville-styled bridge, made by Schaller. Now, you might say, hey, that looks like an ABR1 on this one. Well, that's because somebody replaced it with an aftermarket part. This was the first time that they started putting a bushing inside the body that they then installed the bridge onto. So it's the death of the ABR1. On a standard-made Les Paul anyways. Another interesting transition here is in 1977, they changed up the serial number system. Dating early 70s instruments is kind of difficult because the serial numbers didn't necessarily make sense in a formula format. 77 was the birth of the 8-digit serial number, where the 1st and 5th mean the year, so in this case 1979. The 2nd through 4th is the day of the year produced, so in this case 247. Then the last 3 digits tell you your production number. And they still use that yet today. There was a brief period where they did a year production number thing, but we're finally back to the one that makes sense. So that's a really big thing. Another thing is this is when you start to see the return of solid-bodied guitars. Now, we're not talking weight relief yet. That didn't start till 1983. But we're talking no more pancake bodies. They start to phase out around 76, 77, but you can find them as late as 79. It's kind of one of those things you gotta check if you care about that. Personally, I could care less if it's pancake or not, but there's some people out there that hate pancakes. What's with that? And the last fun little thing is this is actually the era where the Les Paul Standard was birthed. The term Les Paul Standard didn't really exist until like 74 or so, because before then it was just the Les Paul Deluxe. They had mini humbuckers and it was a very common modification for somebody to route them out. Now there's custom orders of deluxes with humbuckers that will have that standard truss rod cover on them, so that's why I say around 74. So while a mid to late 70s Les Paul Standard might not be my favorite guitar in the world, you can definitely see why they are historically significant and they are pretty good players. So let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench and take a more in-depth look at this one. So the more I was looking at this guitar, the more I was like, oh man, there's been a bunch of replaced parts. First off, I added the switch tip. It was missing previous to this. It initially had a clip lock system on it. I'm not a fan of these, but I can see why people like them. I just prefer Schaller's, so I put that on there. But we'll go over the rest of the replaced parts a little bit later. But I was happy to see original T-top pickups in here. This is essentially what a standard T-top will look like from the mid-70s. You'll have a date stamp right here. In this case, we get a July 23rd in the bridge position and an August 27th in the neck. Sometimes those can be as much as like 9 months apart. Construction-wise, these are all short neck tenons, and sometimes you'll see little stamps in here. I can't really read what that one says. Sometimes you'll find women's names in these. But inside this one, you can see a CHS and a B that's cut off. That stands for Cherry Sunburst. Now, sometimes that won't always refer to the finish. Like, I've seen examples where the guitar is a completely different factory color than what's stamped in there. That happens sometimes, but usually they match up. This one still has the original Nashville style posts on it, but somebody swapped in a different style ABR1 on here. It says BREG, so not a Gibson brand. Here's what the tailpiece looks like. This particular one has a 3-piece maple top. You have some pretty nice figuring in this one over here, as well as on this one. So I like to call these examples bearded ladies because, you know, beautiful lady guitar, but it's kind of a mix match top. Within the circuit, the bridge pickup reads about 7.67. And in the neck, we get a 7.73. Moving on, we have a maple neck with a rosewood fretboard. This board actually looks really nice now that I've cleaned the frets up and cleaned this off. I don't see any fret wear that you're really going to have to worry about. I mean, very minor, but you can see a few areas of fingernail divoting in here, as well as where the strings have rubbed. Here's a good example of that right there, but nothing to really worry about playability-wise here. Face of the headstock, there was sticker residue over the Les Paul model. Somebody put something in there, so I polished this up real good, and that's pretty much invisible now. You might be able to see it under Blacklight. But here you can see the maple neck, and the truss rod is in perfect shape. That's something you always want to check on these older guitars. But the tuners have been replaced to the top locking Grovers. I'm not a huge fan of them. In fact, I dislike them so much I'm going to put something else on here. Why am I doing that? Well, this bottom E one actually broke on me while trying to restring it. The metal locking bit just chipped off. That kind of makes me upset. The truss rod cover just reads standard. Here's something that's cool to see. In the olden days, people would inscribe their social security numbers on things of value. That way, if it ever got stolen, it could be recovered because, hey, that's my SSN. Nowadays, doing that would be bad, but here you can see it on the back of the truss rod cover. Now I've got a set of Gibson Clusen Deluxe on here. There were a few different types of tuners you could find on standards in this era, and this is one of the styles, so I guess it looks more correct now. I also added a pick guard to it. Moving on to the back here, this is what I'd like to see. This was somebody's road dog. I mean, it's got a lot of wear and tear along the edges here. Looks like somebody's strap slowly wore through the finish and then slightly sanded down the wooden body too. I mean, this thing's pretty worn along the edges, but the electronics, despite everything else being changed, they left these things alone. They are perfectly pristine. Looks like these are the 19th week of 1979. This one's the 21st week. 21st week, and we can't read that one. That's usually how it goes though. The volumes match and the tones match. And another little cool feature here is there's a signature. I believe that's FL. You see that in the late 70s, early 80s. That's a signature of a worker. Because there's that one, and then like an RFL or something like that, and it's a father-son team if I remember correctly. One worked in the building department, one was in the finishing department, and they always left their marks in the cavities there and right here. So it's always cool to see those. Not too much going on in the toggle switch cavity, and you'll notice there's not a ground wire, because in this era they used the shielding plate. It just goes over the electronics like that. That's a pretty common modification for somebody to add a traditional ground wire and ditch this. This one is solid body in construction, not a pancake body. Here's your 3-piece maple neck. Now, it's kind of funny switching from maple to mahogany because the finish looks so dark right here, right? That's because of this brown mahogany wood. Now, when you switch over to a lighter kind of yellow colored wood, that's what makes the finish look completely different. So that's kind of another identifying characteristic of this era. You can see you've got some light figuring in here, nothing too crazy. Now, the only bad thing about me swapping out the tuners, I did not have enough screws, so I just have the screws in the bottom pilot holes. You don't technically need them in the top, but you might take a trip to your hardware store to complete that. So this is Nashville made in USA, 1979, 247th day of the year, 24th in production. This one's actually a pretty good weight for the Norland era, just under 10 pounds, 9 pounds, about 15 ounces. I get a 1.66 inch nut width, which increases to 2.02 at the 12th. First fret neck depth, 0.84, and it increases to 1.05 at the 12th. And that's mainly because you're starting to hit the slope right here of the neck. So if I go back one fret, you're at 0.98. and a traditional 24 3/4 inch scale. Now that we know all about this instrument, let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. Now that we know how this instrument sounds, let's go ahead and review its condition. This standard is a bit of a road warrior. Pretty much all the parts, except for very few, have been replaced as we learned on the bench, but I'll quickly go over that again as we go over these things. So face of the headstock, you've got lots of light nicks and dings, tons of scratches. At one point in time, there was a sticker covering the Les Paul model. I polished that off pretty good, but I bet we'll still see it under Blacklight. Truss rod is perfectly functional. The frets show very minimal wear, hardly any at all, and the fretboard was just cleaned, frets polished. You're pretty well good to go on this one as far as that goes. Just a personalized setup to your own tastes is what you'll need. The face of the guitar, again, 3-piece top. You've got nicks, dings, and scratches pretty much all over this, figuring to the outside pieces, but not the middle one. I mean, this is kind of what they consider a clown burst, where it goes from red directly to yellow without much fade, but it kind of reminds me of an Ace Frehley guitar because you've got the whole creamed out plastics going on here. It's kind of cool in that aspect. But your switch tip is replaced. I just put that on there. I would assume the poker chip could potentially be original. The pickups, thankfully, are original. Bridge has been replaced. Tailpiece looks like it might be stock to me. Pickguard's something that I added. I think it's like a Les Paul Classic pickguard if I remember correctly. And the knobs, they look original to me. We'll have to take a look under Blacklight. Back of the headstock, these tuners have been replaced. That's something I just put on there because the tuners that were on it broke. And they only have the screws in the bottom pilot holes. You don't technically need the top one, but you could add them if you wanted to. You have the original nut on this one yet, and thankfully no breaks, cracks, or repairs. Now the finish on the back of the neck, it's pretty good when you're looking just right here, but it's along the edges where you can see it has started to wear off, and that kind of makes the neck feel a little bit sticky, so you could potentially steel wool the rest of this down just to make it a little bit more comfortable. But I do want you to be aware of the finish wear on the edges. And then speaking of finish wear here, I mean, there's some buckle rash and tons of worming marks on the back. I mean, this was somebody's Road Warrior. I mean, the rest of the guitar, it looks pretty good, right? But once you get to the back, it's like, man, what happened to this thing? So the finish has kind of been rubbed away right here, and some of the wood has also been slightly sanded off. I'm guessing that's because of somebody's strap continuously rubbing against it. But you've got lots of finish wear along the edges here as well. So somebody loved this thing, and as we saw on the back of the truss rod cover is somebody's social security number and name. So if it got stolen, they definitely wanted it back. Now we'll do a blacklight test here. Man, this thing just glows. But that's good. We want it to glow. So that means, yes, these are original styled knobs. So that's how somebody who didn't make the modifications like I did would know, is by looking at how they glow. Binding's looking good here. Face of the headstock, there we go. You can see that sticker residue like I thought we would. Back of the headstock, everything's looking good here. No breaks, cracks, or repairs. This will kind of help you see that finish wear I'm talking about along the edge of the neck. Not only where it's missing, but kind of where the clear coat has also been rubbed off. So looks like it was a solo guy, not just a chord chunker like me. This is why I love blacklight tests. So this looks like some sort of touch-up or something. Not too big of a deal when other parts have been replaced and you got worn finish in other areas. But here you can see what I was talking about here along the edges of the body as well. So, I mean, it's pretty well worn in, but if that's what you're looking for, I think you would love this standard. We do have an Era Correct Generation 2 Gibson chainsaw case. Fortunately, we're missing one of the latches, but that's okay. You only need 2 of them anyways. So you've got the front one here and the back one there. Somebody has colored in the logo. There are stock colored in logo versions out there, but I've only seen red, gold, and silver. You've got some decent padding left in this one. You don't have any major cracking. I mean, this still feels nice to the touch. Sometimes those dry out and feel yucky. Lid ribbon is missing. I mean, it's a pretty worn case. The hinges are still good enough to keep the lid suspended like that, but the case will flop over if you put it on the floor. But these are my favorite cases of all time. I don't think Gibson will ever make a more protective case than the Gen 2 chainsaw. Inside here, I don't have anything for you, but you've got some like glue residue or something. Double neck rest. I mean, what more can you ask for? If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Gibson Les Paul Standard from 1979, you can check out that link in the description, which will take you to the Reverb for Sale page. Thank you, Troglodytes, for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.